ever feel like? The traditional career path just doesn't quite fit, like maybe your brain is wired for something a little different. In this deep dive, we're exploring that very idea, drawing insights from entrepreneur Kathryn Smith's experience, particularly her unique journey as someone with ADHD.
What's so compelling about Kathleen's story is it challenges us to rethink our assumptions about success and what it means to thrive, both professionally and personally.
She actually starts her story with this super relatable idea of the compulsory corporate life, that whole expectation to go from school to a stable corporate job. But for Kathleen, climbing that ladder at companies like AT&T, primarily in marketing, just didn't quite click. It wasn't fueling her the way she'd hoped.
It speaks to a common experience, especially among neurodivergent individuals, of feeling like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole.
Totally. But before we dive into that aha moment of her ADHD diagnosis, there's this fascinating period where she's building, get this, something like 20 to 30 mobile websites a day.
Whoa, hold on. 20 to 30 websites a day. That's incredible. What was the context for that?
So, this was back when businesses were making that big leap from print to online. During the Yellow Pages transition, imagine the pressure cooker of that moment.
Right.
And Kathleen dove headfirst into that world, using her coding skills to meet this huge demand.
That kind of intense output,
right,
especially in those early days of web design, really speaks to an ability to focus and produce under pressure. Makes you wonder if that fast-paced, tech-heavy setting actually played to her strengths in a way that a traditional corporate environment might not have.
It's like her brain was made for that moment. And she even talked about how back then, mobile sites were basically desktop versions, just reconfigured using CSS.
For those unfamiliar, CSS is basically the code that dictates the look and layout of a website.
Yeah.
So she was essentially doing this intricate digital dance, day in and day out.
Which, to someone who might not be as tech-savvy, sounds both amazing and utterly terrifying.
Right. It really highlights how neurodiversity can manifest as both a challenge and an advantage, depending on the context.
So true. And speaking of context, let's talk about that aha moment I mentioned earlier. Kathleen was actually diagnosed with ADHD later in life. And looking back on her childhood and education, it's like suddenly a lot of things clicked into place.
For a lot of people, that diagnosis is a watershed moment. It's not just about putting a name to a set of traits. It's about understanding the why behind certain patterns of behavior, certain challenges, and yes, certain strengths.
And in Kathleen's case, it was her twin brother's diagnosis, around age 11 or 12. That planted the seeds for her own.
The twin aspect is fascinating because it underscores how neurodiversity isn't one size fits all, even within the same family. With shared genetics, it can express itself in remarkably different ways.
It's mind-blowing. So Kathleen was this straight-A student but struggled with organization and procrastination. Her bedroom was, as she put it, a constant source of tension with her parents. Classic signs.
Right, absolutely. And those signs often get misinterpreted, especially in girls and women. It's not always the stereotypical hyperactivity. It can present as inattention, difficulty with executive function, emotional dysregulation.
And her brother, also incredibly bright, was gifted artistically and musically, but struggled socially. She talked about how he was often perceived as the eccentric artist type.
Which just goes to show how much work we still have to do in challenging those limited perceptions of neurodiversity.
Right. It's not about fitting people into neat little boxes. It's about appreciating the full spectrum of human expression.
100%. And what's interesting is that Kathleen and her brother didn't always see eye to eye growing up.
That's not uncommon, especially when one sibling's differences are more readily recognized and supported, while the other feels like they're constantly being compared or falling short. She even admitted to thinking her brother was a bit weird at times, not fully grasping the challenges he faced. Which just goes to show how important open communication and empathy are, both within families and in society at large.
It's about recognizing that what might seem like a quirk or a choice to some could be rooted in neurological wiring.
Right.
That understanding can make all the difference.
And that leads us to Kathleen's journey as an entrepreneur, because once she understood her own neurodiversity, it was like she was able to unlock a whole new level of success.
It's a great example of how self-awareness can be so empowering, right? Once you understand how your brain works, you can start to create strategies and systems that play to your strengths.
And she really emphasizes the importance of building a supportive team. She talks about surrounding herself with people who not only complement her skills, but also understand her unique working style and needs.
That's such a key point. It's not just about finding people who can do the jobs. It's about finding people who get you, who understand that sometimes you might need a little extra support or flexibility.
And she gave this great example. She was saying that her team knows she's prone to procrastination, but instead of judging or trying to force her into a mold that doesn't fit, they've found ways to provide gentle accountability and set boundaries that actually help her thrive.
It's like they've created a safety net that allows her to take risks and be creative without the fear of falling apart.
Exactly. And speaking of tools and strategies, Kathleen is a huge advocate for using technology to her advantage, specifically as an entrepreneur with ADHD.
Oh, absolutely. Technology can be a game changer for neurodivergent individuals. It can help to level the playing field in so many ways.
She swears by her Google Calendar, like she blocks out time for focused work with religious dedication and makes sure there's space between meetings to avoid overwhelm.
Which makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah.
It's about creating structure and predictability in a world that can often feel chaotic.
And get this, she's also a huge fan of Calendly.
Calendly. Now, for anyone who hasn't encountered that little gem.
It's life-changing. Basically, it syncs up with your calendar and lets people book meetings with you directly based on your availability, so no more back-and-forth email chains trying to find a time that works.
It streamlines that whole process, which can be a huge energy drain for anyone, but especially for someone with ADHD who thrives on structure and predictability.
It's like having a personal assistant who manages your schedule for you, which frees up so much mental bandwidth for the important stuff.
Exactly. And speaking of freeing up mental bandwidth, Kathleen had this other tech tool up her sleeve that I found absolutely fascinating.
Oh yeah, her use of AI, specifically ChatGPT.
Okay, so we've talked about productivity and time management, but this is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more about how she's using ChatGPT.
So imagine this. She gets hit with a client request, and it requires knowledge that's a little outside her current wheelhouse in the past. This would have sent her down a research rabbit hole for days, maybe even a week.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. The internet can be a black hole of information overload.
Right. But now, instead of getting lost in a sea of tabs and articles, she turns to ChatGPT for a quick, structured deep dive on the topic.
That's brilliant. It's like having an on-demand expert who can distill complex information into manageable chunks.
Exactly. And here's the best part. She doesn't just stop at finding a solution to the immediate problem. She uses ChatGPT to create a personalized learning plan to fill in those knowledge gaps. It's like having a custom-designed crash course tailored to her learning style and pace.
Wow. That's next-level learning optimization. It really makes you rethink how we approach professional development, especially in a world where information is abundant but often overwhelming.
It's all about finding the tools that work with our brains, not against them. And it's not just about finding information quickly, it's about finding it in a way that makes sense to her brain. Which brings us to another one of her secret weapons, a platform called Milanote.
Okay. I'm intrigued. How does Milanote fit into this picture?
So Milanote is like a digital mood board on steroids. It lets her combine notes, images, screenshots, even links, all in one flexible space.
Ah, so it's a way for her to organize her thoughts visually, which can be really helpful for people who learn and process information in a nonlinear way.
Exactly. She called it her triage space for information overload, a place where she can get everything out of her head and into a format that she can actually work with.
It's like she's hacking the productivity game by working with her ADHD, not against it.
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from Kathleen's story. It's not about trying to fit into a box that doesn't work for you. It's about finding the tools, strategies, and support systems that allow you to thrive as your unique neurodivergent self.
Absolutely. And her story is a powerful reminder that what might be considered a weakness in one context can actually be a strength in another. It's all about perspective and finding the right environment for those strengths to flourish.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, for anyone listening who's ever felt like they didn't quite fit in, or like their brain was wired a little differently, Kathleen's story is a beacon of hope.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to success, and that sometimes the very things that make you different are the things that make you extraordinary.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. What seemingly fixed aspects of your own working style, those habits, quirks, or tendencies, might actually hold untapped potential if approached with a fresh perspective or the right support system. Maybe it's time to reframe those so-called weaknesses and see what brilliance lies within